Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist, in for Phil Sanchez. We now have a Democratic candidate in next year's U.S. Senate race. Former lobbyist and state lawmaker Mark Carmichael says he will seek the Democratic nomination for the Senate. I sat down with him to talk about his decision to run. Let's welcome in Mark Carmichael. Mark, thank you for dropping by today.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Glad to be here.
So why are you running for the Senate?
Well, I think I need somebody that I can vote for, and I can't vote for Jim Banks. And so I think there's a lot of people out there like me who are looking for a viable option, and I hope to be it. Jim Banks is too radical for me, and I think connected at the hip with Trump and connected at the hip with the National Rifle Association. So those two things make it impossible for Jim Banks to compromise. To win a Republican primary anymore, you have to pledge allegiance to Donald Trump, and you have to pledge allegiance to the National Rifle Association. When you do that, then you can't compromise.
Jim Banks right now has about $2.2 million on hand, and he's got the support of the Republican base. In last year's Senate election, Democrats got less than 40% of the vote. How's next year going to be any different?
Well, every election is the dynamic between the two people in it. And last time out, Tom McDermott was the Democrat nominee, and he was running against a popular incumbent. Incumbents, especially incumbent Republicans in Indiana, are nearly impossible to beat. And so I think that was reflected in the outcome of the race with McDermott and Young. This is an open seat. This is a presidential year. This is a gubernatorial year. This is a year when lots of people are going to come out and vote. And Roe v. Wade has been overturned by the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of pent-up demand as it relates to women's bodies and how they can control their own bodies. And so we've also had several more massacres of children with military-style assault weapons in the last 2 years. So a lot of things change, and the dynamics, like I said, of each race are totally different.
You said you want to codify Roe v. Wade into federal law. What would that look like?
Well, it would look like what Roe v. Wade was when the Supreme Court approved it 50 years ago. A woman would have the right in the first trimester to make her own decisions as it related to abortion. I think that, women, when the abortion law kicks in, then women, in my opinion, become second-class citizens. And so my goal is to try and make that a situation that we don't have to deal with anymore. I don't think women should be second-class citizens. And I think when the government tries to regulate their bodies, then they become second-class citizens. Should
there be a limit to when a woman can receive an abortion?
I don't think I'm qualified to say. I mean, I think that every situation is unique, absolutely every one. And so I don't think it's possible to have a one-size-fits-all law that works. However, I understand that some people are going to need some restrictions to be okay with abortion, while others think that there should be none. I personally think I would have to sit down in each case with every woman considering an abortion, talk about the situation, and then decide between, if it was any of my business, which I'm not convinced it's any of my business. So I'm more in favor of letting the woman and her doctor and her family and her God decide what she needs to do under those unique circumstances.
What do you mean when you say you want to take immediate action on global warming?
Global warming is something that we need to address immediately. I mean, the seas are becoming warmer faster than we ever imagined. And so I think that we need to continue to explore ways to heat our houses and to light our houses other than fossil fuels. Now, we're going to have to go with a mixture of everything we have right now to keep our economy going, but we can't quit trying to wean ourselves off of the fuels that we know are warming up our environment. And I think that Democrats are more committed to that movement than Republicans. I believe Republicans are more interested in trying to keep our current way of life going, whatever it takes. Well, that's great for us, but it's leaving our kids and our grandkids a world that they may not be able to live in. There's going to be parts of our world where it's going to be too hot for the human body to survive.
You talked about essentially an all-options approach to energy, but you said at its core you want to continue to wean us off of fossil fuels. But in the meantime, where do we get those existing fossil fuels? Do we try to expand domestic production, or do we continue to rely on foreign sources for that?
Well, I'm always in favor of domestic productions because of the jobs that it creates. I mean, I think it's important to understand, especially being in a coal state like Indiana, that there were a lot of jobs in the coal industry, and there still are. And we have to protect those as best we can. And so I think the movement away from fossil fuels needs to be slow and steady, but I think domestic production is what we need to rely on in the meantime.
You've called for a ban on military-style rifles. First off, how would you define them under law? And second, what would you do about the, frankly, millions of those types of rifles that already are in circulation?
It can be described. It can be described as a rifle that shoots more than a bullet with a single pull of the trigger. It can be described as a rifle that contains a magazine bigger than X number of bullets. It can be described. The problem is, how are we going to deal with the ones that are already out there? Can we get them back? Can we pay for them? You know, can we have a period of time where if you were interested, we would buy your weapon back from you because they did pay for them and it was legal when they did it? So it's a real issue. I don't think the definition is a problem. People work on this all the time. I think what the problem is what are we going to do with the ones that are out there now? And do we have a way to get them back? If not, then we're going to have to grandfather them in and move on and look for other ways, whether it is raise the age of being able to purchase a gun to 21, whether it's we extend background checks, whether it's we have red flag laws. We have to keep trying.
What sets you apart from other potential Democratic candidates?
I have the time. I have the experience being a former legislator. And I'd like to say that, you know, although I'm a lot younger than Trump and Biden, I have the experience, you know, of life. And I'm not a bomb thrower. I'm a problem solver. And I want to go to Washington and work with people. You know, I want to work for solutions to our nation's problems. I'm not afraid of being primaried. I'm not wedded to any group, you know, and so I'm not afraid to compromise and get things done.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team talks Carmichael's chances and a federal ruling on transgender rights that might affect matters here in Indiana. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Kip Tew and Republican Tom John. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Let's begin with that interview we just heard from Mark Carmichael. Kip, Hammond Mayor Tom McDermott got less than 40% of the vote against Todd Young last year, and he was an incumbent office holder. Does Carmichael have a realistic shot?
Well, you know, obviously it remains to be seen. I will tell you that I thought he gave a terrific interview with you just a little bit ago. He was very candid. He was relaxed. He didn't come off like a typical politician. So I think all those things inure to his benefit. And like he said, I think you can't compare last year's election to next year's election. Number one, Todd Young is much more of a centrist than Jim Banks. Todd Young is the incumbent and has been serving in the Senate for 6 years. Jim Banks only serves in one district. Jim Banks will have the advantage. There's no question. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But, Jim Banks is also an extremist and a Trumper. And I think that Indiana, despite the fact that it voted for Trump twice, is really not Alabama or Wyoming. The voters in Indiana do make independent decisions a lot of times in campaigns, and I think we may be getting to the end of the Trump era, and Jim Banks has bet on the wrong guy.
Tom, should Republicans worry about this one if Donald Trump is at the top of the ticket and anti-Trump voters turn out in force?
I think it doesn't matter whether Trump's at the top of the ticket or not. The fact is, the last time a Democrat won was in 2012 when Donnelly, who by all accounts was a strong candidate, a sitting congressman, but yet only won really because of a mistake by the Murdoch campaign. Last time you saw a Democrat win in a race where you didn't have the Republicans making massive mistakes was 2004 with Evan Bayh. 2018, Donnelly, who was an incumbent and strong candidate, lost to Mike Braun going away when it was all said and done. Mark was articulate in his interview, and good for him. I think he'll have a good debate, but the reality is Jim Banks is a hard worker. He's well thought of in his congressional district. I think Indiana will like him. He'll win going away.
A federal judge struck down Arkansas's ban on gender transition procedures for minors. Indiana's law matches that of Arkansas almost word for word. Tom, could this ruling be used against Indiana's ban?
Well, I think obviously it's not controlling precedent. And, you've got a lot of appeals. I imagine they're going to intercede through the conclusion of that. But it's certainly persuasive authority for the case in Indiana, and I think it'll tell people in Indiana how to litigate their case. So it could certainly affect it, but it's hard to tell from one judge to another judge. Obviously, judges that were appointed, one by Trump, one by Biden, or one by Democrats, what will really happen, but I don't think it has at this point a huge impact on what comes out of this case.
Kip, it's worth noting the judge in the Arkansas case is an Obama appointee. The judge handling Indiana's case is a Trump appointee. We've got a little over a minute left here. How likely is it that that will affect the rulings here?
Well, I hope it doesn't. I hope we haven't politicized the district courts to such a degree that whatever president picks you as how you interpret the law when it comes to this. This is one of the most egregious laws that's been passed in the history of Indiana, beating up on the most vulnerable people for no real apparent reason except to play to your base. It's disgusting, and I hope what happens is that it gets overturned.
Now, briefly, in that ruling, the judge wrote the witnesses in favor of the ban grounded their testimony in ideology rather than science. And I heard some similar testimony during the initial hearing on Indiana's ban earlier this month. Kip and Tom, this is for both of you. We got about a minute left here. Do you see that potentially causing one of these to be an impeachable witness in the Indiana case?
Certainly, both laws were written by the same group of folks. They're nearly identical in language, and it really is taking away the rights of parents to make the decisions that are in the best interest of their children. All the other stuff was a bunch of hyperbole and stuff that really didn't happen in the state of Indiana. But there are people that are getting negatively affected in a great way right now by not having some of this care available in the state of Indiana. We got about 30 seconds left
here. Tom, let me give you the last word on this one.
Yeah, to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. There's been a roadmap laid out of weaknesses in the proponents' cases, and I think that will affect how this case gets litigated. It'll be interesting to see, but let's face it, this will end up continuing to go up the court system, and we won't know.
Well, Kip and Tom, stay with us. When we come back, the Supreme Court's abortion ruling 1 year later and a potential trial date for former President Donald Trump's classified documents case. Welcome back. This weekend marks 1 year since the Dobbs v. Jackson ruling that reversed Roe v. Wade. Indiana's Supreme Court could rule any day now on whether the state's near-total abortion ban should remain blocked. This is part of the lawsuit that challenges the ban on privacy grounds. So to be clear, the court has yet to hear testimony on the privacy case itself. Tom, John, if the state Supreme Court keeps the preliminary injunction in place, is the ban doomed?
No, I think that it obviously is something that the proponents of striking down the ban, it's favorable to them, but there's a lot real estate between here and there to actually have the merits of the case decided. So I think this is a question of weighing the merits of the parties and who's at risk and what it is. And just because the court might be cautious in keeping the ban in place doesn't necessarily indicate where the ultimate case wind up.
Kip, the Dobbs ruling explicitly deemed abortion a legislative matter. If this goes all the way back to the U.S. Supreme Court, what are the chances any lower court rulings get vacated under that logic, regardless of what the lower courts decide?
Well, I'd take a little bit of issue with you that the Supreme Court in the Dobbs decision said it was a legislative matter, said it was a state matter. And so I think it is relevant that that this is a state court decision about whether the Indiana Constitution finds abortion to be a protected right. And in the litigation, the oral arguments, you heard Ken Falk say that women have a liberty interest in autonomy with their own bodies based upon Indiana's Constitution. There was pushback from the Solicitor General on that point, but even Loretta Rush had to get him to concede that this is a case of first impression. Abortion has never been litigated with the backdrop of the Indiana Supreme Court. So it'll be interesting to see, and I agree with Tom's analysis that the preliminary injunction doesn't necessarily forebode what the final decision will be.
Speaking of federal courts, a federal judge has tentatively set former President Donald Trump's classified documents trial for August. Now, Kip, trials get delayed all the time. How likely is it this will actually go to trial before the primaries begin?
Not highly likely. I wish the other way. I wish he would be tried and stuck in prison because that's where he belongs. But I don't have a lot of hope that we're going to have this thing litigated and done before the primaries begin.
Tom, I'll let you weigh in on that as well, but I also want to ask, polls already show this is solidifying Trump's support among the Republican base. If he goes into the first primaries with a guilty verdict, does that punch his ticket for the party nomination?
Well, initially, as to the trial timeline, I tend to agree with Kip that it is a really aggressive timeline, which typically is, you wouldn't see that. Now, the one caveat I'll make is if both sides want to see it go quickly, it could go quickly. If one of the sides, particularly Trump's side, want to slow it down, then arguably it probably will get slowed down. Now, does it punch his ticket?
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, now, does it punch his ticket? I think that right now you're seeing some solidification, but also there is a lot of discussions. We don't know what all is going to come out in the context of this case. There may be other actions that are brought against him, and I think it's just awfully early to tell one way or the other where things settle out. He has seen some weakness, actually, in his position as of late. So it certainly doesn't help him in the general, though, if he does get the nomination.
We got a little bit more than a minute left. I want to briefly address Hunter Biden's plea agreement. It involves 2 misdemeanor counts of failing to pay taxes. Tom, we're not talking about classified documents or sexual assault here. Does this undermine Republicans' complaints of a 2-tiered justice system?
Well, I think that you had a Trump appointee who was prosecuting. You had a plea agreement entered. At least from the facts that are there, it seems there was some wrongdoing, but it certainly didn't blow up to the level of some of the other accusations. So I think it's really a non-issue at the end of the day, personally.
Kip, I'll let you weigh in as well, but also, did Hunter Biden get off easy?
I mean, it's a plea agreement, so I don't think so. I think it was something that both sides agreed was the best course of action. Look, Hunter Biden has no position in the Biden administration. He is the son of the president. He's had a well-documented history of many problems, most of them because of his drug addiction. And it's a sad story. It's a sad case, but it doesn't reflect on Joe Biden. It reflects on Hunter Biden. It is different from Trump in that his daughter and son-in-law both worked inside the administration and were self-dealing the entire time. That's a much more serious matter.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We'll be right back.
Take All Indiana Politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. You can also find our brand new All Indiana Politics podcast. It's part of the All Indiana Podcast Network at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.